right, thanks for joining me in another episode of Why Not Go. I'm Maggie, and this channel is dedicated to rock and roll, and especially punk, and especially the Sex Pistols. Well, on this day, something very historic happened. November 6, 1975 was when the Sex Pistols first stepped on stage at St. Martin's College of Art. And I'm interviewing someone, John Ellis, who was in the audience that night. So I'm very excited about that. And first I want to thank one of my viewers, Mike Basie Edmonds, who also has a YouTube channel that's very entertaining. He does a lot of rock and roll stuff. And Mike introduced me, or made the connection with John Ellis. So thank you so much, Mike, for putting me in touch. And John Ellis, the reason why he was there was because the Sex Pistols were opening up for a band called Bazooka Joe. And I'll show a photo of them here. And they were a 50s style rock and roll type of band. And John Ellis, he was a guitar player. He started the band with Danny Kleinman back in 1970. And he wasn't in the band though on this day. He had already quit the band, and I guess he was doing other things. But who was in the band was Stuart Goddard, who became Adam Ant. And Stuart Goddard went to the same art college as John Ellis and Danny Kleinman, so they all knew each other. And so this was a very historic day. I have a video, and I'll put a link in the description that I've done on their first show, where I'm showing the location of the St. Martin's College of Art on Charing Cross Road, and I also go to Denmark Street, their rehearsal space. Well, it was a Thursday night, and the reason why they played St. Martin's College of Art is because Glenn Matlock got them the gig, because he was going to school there at the time. And I'll show a picture of the way the band looked on that night. I don't know if this photo was taken on that night, but Lydon was wearing the same shirt, the I Hate Pink Floyd t-shirt, which I love. He wore that shirt for this first gig. And you know, they looked very, very young at this point. But yes, they only played 4.5 songs. And the reason for that was because Danny Kleinman pulled the plug on their set. So I always find that funny, that story so funny. And I'll just read a quote from Danny Kleinman about that night. He says, I wasn't overly impressed. They did cover versions, and there was some not too competent playing. They seemed okay until they started smashing up our equipment. Johnny Rotten was kicking one of our speaker cabinets that we hadn't finished paying for, and had lumbered up those stairs. So I guess where they played was on the one of the upper floors of the art college. And I thought, what's going on? You're not Pete Townsend, mate. I got irate and jumped in and manhandled him, and it all stopped. It wasn't my finest hour. I'm probably too dull to have picked up on the fact that this was a game-changing event. Perhaps it set the tone for their later infamy. So that's kind of interesting. So he kind of, I guess he kind of regrets pulling the plug on their set. But I can understand it if Johnny was kicking one of the speaker cabinets and it was their equipment. So they were in the middle of playing Did You Know Wrong when this happened. And so they only got to play 4.5 songs. They played Substitute and No Lip and Stepping Stone. And so those are cover songs that were part of their, that would go on to be part of their repertoire. And then they did 17, which is an original song, of course. And they did Did You Know Wrong. I always loved Did You Know Wrong. But they only got to play, I guess, just part of it. So there was only about 30 or so people in the audience. Viv Albertine was there, Andy Tchaikovsky, who went on to do the Roxy nightclub. And there was some the inner circle of the band. Of course, Vivian and Malcolm were there, and Jordan was there, but it's a very small group of people. So I'm really thrilled to be interviewing John Ellis, who was there that night, and we'll talk about the gig. And he's also a very interesting person in his own right. After Bazooka Joe, he founded this band, and I've always loved the Vibrators. I got their album Pure Mania when it came out in 1977. It's very fast-paced, catchy, rock and roll punk music. I loved it. That's John Ellis there, on that corner, and he was in the Vibrators for a couple years, and then he went on to play with Peter Gabriel, and he also went on to join the Stranglers. He was in the Stranglers in the 90s for 10 years. So he's had a very interesting musical life, and he's still very active in music, and I'll put info in the description of this video, some links you can click on to see what John Ellis is doing today. So I hope you enjoy the interview on this historic day in rock and roll history, when this guy, along with Steve and Glenn and Paul, got up on stage for the first time and inspired countless people in many different ways with their game-changing sound and attitude. So hope you enjoyed the interview. Thanks for watching. So I'm happy to be joined here with John Ellis, who is in London right now, East London, right? East London, and
Yeah.
I'm in Florida, of course. Unfortunately, my camera is not the best, but hopefully good enough for an interview. Well, thank you for your time, John.
My
Um,
pleasure.
well, what a career you've had. I was just explaining my channel, and a lot of my viewers, love the Sex Pistols like I do. But you've done many things throughout your career, not just punk. But I wanted to interview you for this historic day. I'm going to upload this November 6th, when the Sex Pistols played their first gig at St. Martin's College of Art, which I did a video on. I was recently in London, and I did a video on Denmark Street and St. Martin's and all that. Although you can't go inside anymore because it's moved. So you were there on that historic day because you were in Bazooka Joe. So tell me about Bazooka Joe. So it started, you and Danny Kleinman started the band in 1970?
Possibly. Yeah, you're probably right. We
That's
started
what
while we
it's
were still.
that's what it says
Well,
online anyway.
it must be right then.
Yeah.
We started because we were just mates who loved that rock and roll. I think we'd probably been to see Woodstock together, and Shana. We were both impressed by Shana Na, and we
Yeah.
thought, wouldn't it be great to have a little kind of proper rock and roll band? So we did it while we were at school, and we did our first gigs in a place called Hampstead Town Hall, if I remember correctly, in the room, strangely enough, in the room where my mum and dad met.
Oh, that's
Um,
neat.
but we kind of got a bit of momentum because we were young and one of the few people were still doing proper rock and roll.
Mhm.
And by the time the Pistols gig came along, I'd left. I wasn't actually in the band because
Yes, I knew that. Yes.
I tend to get into bands and out of bands. But it was the lineup that had Stuart Goddard, Akka, Adamant in it.
Yes.
And
So you
for a long
you didn't play with Stuart Goddard. He was he joined the band later.
Yeah, but I did actually do a few gigs with that lineup just for fun and because one of the guitarists wasn't available. But basically, for a long time, I didn't think I was at that gig. And then I bumped into the guy who was mixing the sound. And he said, "Of course you're at the gig because you were standing next to me." And I do have a vague memory of dragging the Hammond organ up the flight of stairs to get to the refectory in the college. So yeah, I was there, but it wasn't a great big deal. I mean, what I find very interesting as I get older about music and iconic moments is that sometimes they're more mythology than reality. So
Yes.
there's a great deal of mythology about that particular event. And in fact, there was a TV series made by Danny Boyle about the Sex Pistols,
I
and
saw it.
that event was in the TV series. And very strangely, the guy that auditioned for the part of playing Daniel Kleinman in the St. Martin's School of Art scene was Daniel's actual own nephew, and he didn't get the job of playing his uncle. But
Oh,
it was not a big deal. There weren't that many people there for a start. There were only about 30 people there.
yes.
And
From what I've read, there was there was very few people, and in Glenn Matlock's, he's written a couple books. In his recent book, he thinks of that as sort of a warm up gig in a way to their gig the following night, where they could actually do a full set. They played at Holborn College the following night. But I don't know if you remember what they played, but according to the books I've read, they only got through 5 songs: Stepping Stone, No Lip, Substitute. Of course, that was in their set all the time, as well as No Lip, and 17, an original. And then apparently during Did You Know Wrong, the second original that they did, Danny Kleinman pulled the plug on them. Do you remember that?
well, Dan has a different version of it, so
Yeah.
you should ask Dan about that. I mean, as I said, this has become mythology, and what people think is a riot is just a bit of argy-bargy, a bit of pushing and shoving. So I don't remember Dan pulling the plug, but maybe he did. You'd have to ask Daniel. But the next time I encountered in those guys was at the punk festival at the 100 Club,
Oh,
which
yes.
was where they did play a proper, as far as I can remember, a proper set. Here's a very weird thing. Now I can't confirm this, but not long ago, the drummer from the Vibrators, Eddie, said, "Oh, do you remember the famous Sex Pistols gig at St. Martin's? Do you remember you and me playing with the two of the Pistols before anyone came in the room to help the sound guy get his mix while Johnny Rotten and presumably Steve Jones went off in search of an amplifier?" So I'm finding it very hard to find anyone who remembers that, but Eddie is adamant that we did these two couple of rock and roll numbers with two of the Pistols in order to help the sound man get his sound together.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, apparently, from what I've read, in especially in this book, I don't know if you've read this, The Life and Times of Malcolm McLaren. It's very detailed in Sex Pistols history, and apparently, the writer Paul Gorman said that Steve Jones didn't like the amp sound from that was provided by Bazooka Joe, and he went to Denmark Street to wheel back his own amplifier. So perhaps that's when you got on stage and
I think
jammed.
that's when I think it would have been definitely then. But it'd be nice. I mean, it'd be interesting just to say that I was actually there. Well, I know I was there, but doing what I did. But to be perfectly honest, it's I do really understand how people really get all this, love this stuff. But for me, it's just something I did. It was just it's something that it's just the past, really.
No, I
And
understand. So you went because you were still friends with Danny Kleinman, who started
I
Bazooka
think,
Joe, even though you weren't in the band anymore.
well, one thing I do vaguely remember was Dan calling me up and saying, "Look, we're doing this gig, and we've been told that the band that supporting us are going to come and make some trouble, or they've got a reputation for trouble," which was presumably Malcolm just doing a number and trying to create this buzz about these guys. So I think he said, "Why don't you come down in case we need a bit of help?" But it wasn't it wasn't anything heavy duty. There's no real riot at all, unlike, say, I don't know, Elvis performing somewhere where they'll rip
Yeah.
out the seats at a cinema. It was just very mild.
Do you remember Danny Kleinman getting upset that Johnny Rotten was kind of trashing the monitor,
Well, that's
the sound
Daniel's
system?
on. If you hunt around the internet, you'll find Daniel talking about it on
Hmm.
YouTube. But it didn't come, as far as I remember, it didn't come to blows.
It
And
didn't. Okay.
it just came to a bit of pushing and shoving. That's all. It was no real big deal.
Yeah, but
I'm
apparently
sorry
he
to
did.
disappoint you, Margaret.
No, that's okay. That's okay. No, I figured because I've read quotes from Danny Kleinman, and he just said that he in fact, I have one here from the book, and he says from Paul Gorman's book, and Danny Kleinman says, "We said sure, okay, we'll." Oh, he let them play their sound system, play their with the monitors, but then I can't find the exact quote, but he says something like, "Hey, you're not Pete Townsend. What are you doing, like trashing our stuff?" And then he pulled the plug. Yeah, that's what he said later.
Okay,
Yeah.
ancient history.
Oh, I know. But it's amazing that you were there and that you could say that, I mean, it's just interesting, even to know that it probably wasn't a riot or an event like maybe some people
No,
have said it was.
no,
Yeah.
I sort of get, I get it, Margaret. I do a walk around London through my musical memories, and I take my people to that exact spot outside and tell them what happened, and lots of other places as well. And I sort of understand it, but
Hmm.
I'm a musician and a writer now and a photographer. So for me, all this stuff is just old stuff
Oh, I
that
understand. Yeah.
I don't kind of obsess about really, and I'm much more interested in moving on. And I'm happy to talk about it. And for my memory is pretty shot, and I am happy to talk about it. But it's sort of, some of it seems to me to be a bit insignificant, really.
Yeah, yeah. I'm sure because you were there. I think for us that weren't there, it carries it has a
No,
bit
I
of
get that.
more of a mystique. So where they played was
Yeah, that's
upstairs, right? Yeah, because
it
it's
was
all I
upstairs in the refectory room.
okay, because I know that when I was there recently, you can't. I know St. Martin's College of Art is has moved to a different location, and you can't get into the building to get
Right,
inside. But
right.
apparently, I think Glenn Matlock was there, and they have like a blue plaque, but it's not on the outside of the building; it's somewhere
No,
inside. So
right.
so I don't know
Yeah.
who gets to see it. So, well, thank you for sharing that memory. I want to talk about next about the vibrators. And I got my old album out, and that's you there. Uh,
Yes, yes, it's me.
yeah,
Very,
love the
very
photo.
skinny.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, you still look great. I love everybody on the album, and I always loved the cover with the V. So tell me, because not long after Bazooka Joe, I think it was 1976 to 1978, you formed the Vibrators, or you were in the Vibrators.
Yeah, I was at arts. I was doing my degree at art school, and so Daniel Kleiman again, myself, and Adam Mann, then known as Stuart Goddard, we were in the same. We were all in the same class doing a graphic design degree course at a
Mm-hmm.
place called Middlesex Polytechnic,
Mm-hmm.
that had been Hornsey College, the famous Hornsey College of Art. It was the same thing, but it just had a different name. And I was getting a little bit bored with just doing visual stuff. So I can't remember what happened, but basically there was a conversation with myself and Pat Collier and the drummer Eddie and Knox, who Knox had been in bands forever. He
Mm-hmm.
was like over 10 years older than the rest of us. And we just decided to go and start gigging. And we put a load of songs together, a lot, which was really interesting because Knox was a big fan, a very early fan of Iggy Pop. So we
Hmm.
were doing quite a few Iggy Pop songs, and we were doing covers of Beatles songs, segueing into Pink Floyd. So it was very interesting. But mostly it was fun. and we ended up getting quite a lot of gigs. In fact, the really very strange thing is our first ever gig was supporting the Stranglers at
Oh,
another part of Hornsey College of Art, which was the beginning of my kind of ongoing relationship with the Stranglers.
oh
And
yes,
then
I know. You joined them later in the 90s.
yeah, yeah, and then there was other stuff, but so and then we had a residency at a place called the Lord Nelson Pub in North London, a place called Holloway Road, and that week starts to get a lot of people coming down to see us, and because we were kind of quite anarchic, and the punk thing was beginning to just lift up, we started to get that kind of audience and that kind of coverage. And eventually Mickey Most, at the behest of Chris Spedding, came down and offered us a record deal, which we took, which was a pop. Mickey Most was a pop, although he did produce some of my favorite ever records.
Mm-hmm.
He was known as a pop producer.
Mm-hmm.
So we were kind of happy to do that, but it was a massive mistake because it kind of shut our credibility completely. But then while we were with Mickey, Epic Records wanted to sign us, so we jumped ship, and Mickey quite rightly sued us, and we ended up on Epic, and that was the album you just held up.
Okay.
Was Pure Mania, which was the first album.
Yeah, I loved it, and I'm reminded that the band Stiff Little Fingers, didn't they took their name from one of the songs, right?
They did, yeah. That was one of
Yeah,
the songs I wrote. Yeah, that's true.
yeah.
They did, yeah.
I love I
Absolutely.
love I love that song, and I read in an interview recently where you mentioned that when you were in the Vibrators, that some of the music journalists didn't like you, and I don't know if that was because of the Mickey Most being involved, but you mentioned Julie Burchill, I think, or some other writers that I'm probably not paraphrasing it right, but that you weren't sort of in the inner circle or something like that.
Yeah,
So the press
yeah.
didn't get behind you.
Well, okay. So, I don't know if you've read a book called Revolt into Style by
No,
George Melly. Well, I think it's a must read, actually, for anyone who's interested in the cultural phenomena of music. So,
I've heard of
what he
it.
talks, it's a great book. And what he talks about is, like tribes. You have to basically, every musical movement is a tribal thing. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's got its fashion, the way it looks, the kind of music it makes, and the kind of people the kind of people that the movers and shakers in it. And because the Vibrators, once we got going, we were doing loads and loads of gigs, mostly out of the UK. I mean, for a lot of people, the first time they ever saw anything which was called punk music was us playing in Germany and Holland and France and
Wow,
Italy and all over the
that's
place.
great.
So because we weren't there, we weren't. I mean, I say this: we were gigging and not ligging, so
Yeah.
we couldn't weren't hanging out in the squats that Johnny Rotten and all those people were hanging out. So we weren't part of their little circle, of tribal circle, really. And
Hmm.
because we were a few years older than everyone else, there was a certain suspicion about our motives. And
Oh,
I mean, our motive was one thing: to have a good time, had to have fun playing, and all the stuff happened around us. And we, obviously, we were quite happy to go with it as people who loved listening to records. When we were suddenly being the people that made the records, we weren't going to say no. So that was that, and we did have a few journalists who liked what we did, but mostly the journalists who had any clout and the fanzines, they just didn't like us really, and signing to Rack Records didn't help. On the other
hmm.
hand, where we played abroad, we got really great press in the cool music papers. So
Hmm.
it's just one of those things, really.
I wish I would have seen I wish I would have seen the Vibrators. Did you play the Roxy and the clubs during
Uh,
that time, the
Are
100
you talking
Club
about in
or
London, the Roxy in
yes.
London?
Hmm.
Yes, we did. Yeah, we played. Yeah, we played all those places. We played all the proper venues, and I go to the Roxy on my little walk and do a little talk about the Roxy. We played the Vortex. We played all the places that you're supposed to play. And then we were one of the first bands to actually go out around the UK and take it out to the people. And it was mostly fun, and we were doing some quite fun music and interesting music, and a lot of people liked it, but some people didn't. That's the way of the world.
Well, I loved this album. This was one of my favorite albums back in the day. So
Thank you
did
so much, Margaret.
Oh, thank you. And I don't, as an American, I must have read about you somewhere, but I loved it, and I'm sorry that I never saw the band live. So
Well, there is
mhm.
some live footage on YouTube of
Oh,
our
okay.
old grey whistle test.
Oh, I loved that show. Yes, I mean I've seen it on YouTube. Yeah.
Well, we're on it, and we do a 4 number. It's the second lineup after Patrick Collier left because he didn't like touring. Then Gary Tibbs came on as bass player, and that's who's on the YouTube. And strangely, he ended up playing with Adam Ant.
Oh,
and then
okay.
he went on to play with Roxy Music. But the
wow.
YouTube stuff is us with Gary on bass.
Oh, okay. And then what happened? Did you just leave the band, the Vibrators, or did it disband? I wasn't clear on that because it looked like.
I can. No, I'll tell you exactly what happened. So we had a kind of minor hit with a song called "Automatic Lover" on the second album.
Oh, okay.
And
I don't know if I remember that.
We had to do a tour starting in January. It was a real big long tour, about 30-day tour. And on day one, I got the flu. I got really ill on day one. And it would have been too difficult to cancel the tour. I mean, it would have been expensive anyway. We'd have probably got sued. So I basically did the whole tour very, 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 very ill. It was okay.
Dear.
But that's what musicians have to do sometimes.
Yeah.
And by the end of it, I was so exhausted that I couldn't think straight. And I thought the only way I can get out of this is by leaving the band. So I went to the management and said, I'm going to leave the band. And because they were kind of naive, they said, okay. I think what they should have said was go on holiday for 2 weeks and then think about it. But they didn't. So I left the band. And then I was flapping about a little bit, still writing songs and stuff. And eventually then the Peter Gabriel thing turned up after it was partly because I'd just I did a session for a band called the Drones from Manchester. I don't know if you heard of them. And so all this is happening around me doing the Euro band tour with JJ Burnell. And my own little band, Rapid Eye Movement. So that's probably the band between the Vibrators was Rapid Eye Movement. And then eventually I got the job with Peter Gabriel to go on tour with Peter on his China tour, which didn't go anywhere near.
That must have been incredible. I mean,
it was amazing because it was me going from sort of mostly small clubs and in the UK to like proper stadium stuff with Peter, and it was very interesting music. And I was playing with amazing musicians. I was playing with Larry Fast, who was one of my great electronic music heroes, and excuse me, great Tony Levin on bass guitar. But I kind of made a bit of a mess of it, the whole situation. Eventually I left. I got kicked out, actually. Well, I got the sack. And I ended up playing with the great Peter Hammill, who, if you know anything about Johnny Rotten cites Peter Hammill as one of his big influences.
I've heard of Peter Hammill, but I'm not familiar with his music.
Okay, well, I better, it's worth checking out.
I will.
If you start to get into Hammill, you're into a whole world.
Wow.
And now I play. So Peter Hammill co-founded Van der Graaf Generator with a incredibly interesting British musician composer called Judge Smith, who's a personal friend of mine now. And I've worked on a lot of Judge's projects as well. But eventually I went touring with Hammill, Peter Hammill, did loads of recordings with Peter. And then after that, I think the Vibrators sort of reformed for a little bit. We made some more records, and then of course that finished, and then ultimately I ended up joining the Stranglers after having a period where I was just working as a mini cab driver and doing all sorts of jobs. But yeah, I ended up in the Stranglers, and then
For a
that
long
came
time, for 10 years, right? From all
10
through the
years. Yeah,
90s.
yeah, that's right.
Wow.
Yeah, that was interesting. I mean, it had its moments,
You must
and
have been playing some big places with the Stranglers. I mean,
not huge.
yeah.
We were doing okay sized gigs. I mean, in London we did the Albert Hall. There's a DVD
Mhm.
of that with an orchestra. We did it with an orchestra, and but it was basically big clubs mostly
Yeah. Did you
in
write
America.
songs with the Stranglers?
Yeah, I wrote loads of stuff with the
Oh,
Stranglers, but that's a whole other story.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, myself and Paul, the singer that came in as well. Yeah,
Mhm.
we contributed to a lot of songwriting, and there's a whole album that I released on my own record label that was basically songs I wrote for the Stranglers that, for various reasons, usually band politics, didn't get
Mm.
used. So that's a whole other album. So yeah, and then across all that period, was also writing electronic music for art exhibitions in Germany and the UK. So there's a lot of material out there, basically.
Oh, yeah, I read about that. You're very I don't know, very diverse, very eclectic. So tell me what you're doing now. I know uh I read that you've got, is it the album called Resonation, and it's demonstrating the blues?
Okay, so
Yeah.
I've always loved blues music. I
Hmm.
mean, it's really important to me. So I've put together an album of demos for a theoretical band. So I'm working with a mandolin player at the moment,
Oh.
rehearsing, hopefully for some shows in January. But I wanted to make demos for all the musicians so that they could listen and work out their parts. But a record label heard the demos. I thought, well, and they said, we really like this. We think it's a great album. So it's on Bandcamp. It's called Resonation Demonstrating. That's on Bandcamp. But I'm also in the process of going back to, well, I'm in the process until my computer's just fried. And I think
Oh.
I've lost 20 years of all my music.
Oh no,
Um,
you no.
I think I have.
Oh God,
But I was in the
I
process
hate
of,
computers.
sometimes I do, but I was in the process of orchestrating a lot of my old material. So so if you go on my SoundCloud page, you'll hear an orchestrated version of my first solo single, Babies in Jars. So
Oh.
that's why so that's doing that. And also I'm halfway through my second novel, which is part a novel trilogy. So I'm writing and looking for a literary agent
Oh,
to
and
take.
what's the novel about?
Well, the first, basically there's three novels. They're part of a series, and they're about a journey of a very bad man who does terrible, terrible things. And it's one of those things, can people be redeemed? It's one of the classic stuff.
Hmm.
And he has a journey. The first novel, he has to walk from London to Cornwall, and he just meets incredibly weird and interesting people, all of whom have an impact on his life. And now in the second novel, I've just been exploring why he turned bad, and it's all to do with what happened at his school. And he'll be walking back to London eventually, and then in book 3 there'll be this big thing happening in London. So I'm just working on that. There's I do a show called My Life in Negative. So I show photographs from my archive and sing
Oh.
songs around the photos. So next year I'm hoping to do some more gigs and do that concert. So I just every day I get up and try and do something creative, really.
Yeah, that's so admirable. I love it. Your novel sounds amazing, by the way. It sounds like a very spiritual journey that this
Well, the people who read the first novel love it, but
mm.
I've taken it off of Kindle because I've revised it basically, so it's more it works better with the second novel. But I'm not going to do any. Just want to try and find a literary agent to take it on and get it with proper publishers, basically, because otherwise it'll just do nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it sounds like you do a lot. So where can people if they want to buy your latest record or see what you're doing, what and I'll put a link in the video. Where should they go?
Well, a good starting place is my website, which is www.charnoyurecords.com. That's a good
Okay,
start.
I'll put that. That's your record label, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I'll put the link in the video.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Margaret.
Yeah.
And also I have a SoundCloud, 2 SoundCloud pages, which I put all my demos on there and all my reworkings of old stuff. So the SoundCloud page stuff, I'll send you a link to the SoundCloud stuff.
Okay, good. And I'll put it in the video. So it sounds like you started your career in with Bazooka Joe doing sort of the early kind of rock and roll classic stuff, and then you obviously had a career in punk, and then now it sounds like you're really branching off into different forms of music. I think that's really admirable.
Well, when I started playing with Gabriel, I had to learn a whole new way of playing. When I worked with Hammill, I had to look for ideas. Now, and the stuff I've done with Judge Smith, I've had to put on a lot of musical hats in the stuff he wanted me to play, which is great because it pushes me. And also, I'm still really interested in blues music. And the Resonation album is basically kind of new ways of playing old stuff. It's like people really like it. And but also I started life as an illustrator. So I have a little idea that if I do finish if I live long enough to finish my 3 books, my novel trilogy, I'll go back and illustrate it.
Oh, neat.
Or use. So what I like, what the kind of artists I like are people who can bring all their different creative disciplines together into one project. I mean, the Germans have a word for it, which is Gesamtkunstwerk, which is basically where you have different disciplines all in one piece of work, really.
That's
I'm still interested. I love pictures. I love drawings. I love writing. I love reading. So for me, it's just finding a way to have all those different parts of my creative personality expressed in various forms. But it would be great to pull them all together into one thing.
Yeah, that's great, because so many people, I mean, it's a lot of people just kind of are pigeonholed into one sort of artistic form, whatever that is. But it sounds like you're still branching out. I love it.
Well, it's not unusual. I mean, if you look at some artists like Tom Waits, for example, or David Byrne, there are a lot of people who are they're able to break out of the boundaries and constrictions of being one label, and they are just creative people. And sometimes it's music, and sometimes it's pictures, or sometimes it's writing.
Yeah, or art.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really what it's all about for me.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me on Why Not Go. I really appreciate it, and as I said, I'll put the link to your record label, and also your is it Bandcamp? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I'll send you all the links.
Okay. All right, that sounds good. So you had so much more to talk about than what happened on November 6th, 49 years ago today, or soon.
Wow,
49,
amazing.
Isn't it?
Amazing.
Oh my God, almost 50 years. It's like, wow, where the time.
Thought?
Yeah, who'd have thought? Who'd have thought? Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you for joining me. I'm gonna.
Thank you, Margaret. It's very nice to talk to you.
Thank you. And until I always sign off. Until the next time, I'll be seeing you. Take care.
I'll be seeing you too.